Hello again. First of all, a big thank you to my subscribers. There are 531 of you, and a huge welcome to new subscribers. The Practical Animal channel is dedicated to the public understanding of the animal industry. Join me on a round-the-world survey of careers with wildlife. The channel aims to give tips that may just give you the edge you need to nail your interview for that dream animal job. To meet today's guest, we go to Mozambique. Professor Julian Bayliss is a tropical forest ecologist specializing in African rainforests. 70% of terrestrial life is found in rainforests. He talks today about discovering a new rainforest and his methods to get it protected, including 15 scientific expeditions, collaboration with 100 other scientists, and the discovery of 12 new species. For students of English as a foreign language, this video will be interesting because you will hear the Welsh accent. Working in the African rainforest and living the wildlife looks like this.
This was quite unusual, Julian, for me to prepare for, because a lot of people that I speak to work with individual species, but you discovered an entire ecoregion, an entire ecosystem, a rainforest in Mozambique in southern Africa.
The word discovery really relates to more the international community than the national community, because the local people always lived around this forest and they hunt in the forest, and obviously they know about the forest because it's their forest and they use it. So when we talk about discovering something like this rainforest, then it's really highlighting it to the international community. So Mulanje is unique and special because it's got a lot of species that are only found there and nowhere else. In other words, endemic species, we call them. So the question arose is what degree of similarity or dissimilarity do these mountains in northern Mozambique share or not with Mount Mulanje in southern Malawi? So we then set up a project. We then set off to explore these northern Mozambique mountains. But before we could do that, we had to actually choose them. So I used Google Earth to locate all of the mountains over 1,500 meters that were closest to Mount Mulanje in southern Malawi. And then once I'd chosen those mountains, I then had to go and have a look at them and just see what was there. And that's really sort of what we call ground truthing. And it's always good to do that. I mean, you can do a lot through satellite imagery, you can do a lot through electronic databases and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, you always have to really, go and visit these sites that you're looking at and visit the sites that you're talking about, just to see if the data that you've got matches what you see in the field, and that's always important. Anyway, so we went to have a look at these sites, and Mount Marble was one of the sites, big tall mountain, 1,700 meters over, and it was a hot sunny day. We decided to try and climb up to it, and we got about 3/4 of the way up and failed. But as we ran out of water, but just as we ran out of water, we were able to look around the corner, and as we did that, we looked around the shoulder of the mountain, and we could see the start of this massive wet forest just starting and just going into the horizon as far as the eye could see. The next day, we walked around the mountain and up the valley, and then eventually we arrived at the start of the forest after about a 4-hour walk, maybe more, and that confirmed that it was actually rainforest, it was actually wet forest. So that was essentially a ground truthing exercise. And then once you've got that, you can then go back to your desk and get up a higher resolution satellite imagery. You've got your GPS points of where you went, So you confirm that it is wet forest or rainforest, and then you've got that habitat type, and then through remote sensing you can then look at the area of the forest that you've now confirmed is wet forest, and then that's basically what we did, and we calculated this area. I've just come back from an expedition to Marbu Forest, and for the first time we went into the center of Marbu Forest, and we haven't managed to do that in 20 years. Marbu Forest is now going to be protected this year. After 20 years, we've now submitted all the paperwork for formal protection and gazettement of the forest as a new protected area for Mozambique and Africa, at the request of the government of Mozambique. So it's going to be approved. This is the result of 20 years of commitment and input into one site, one forest, 15 scientific expeditions, and maybe 100+ people on those expeditions in total, looking at all groups from plants and all groups of animals, from reptiles, amphibians, small mammals, fish, crabs, butterflies, beetles, dragonflies. You know, it feels great to be part of a process of formally protecting the largest rainforest in southern Africa. That's very good, and it's very satisfying as a conservationist to have an achievement like that. It's not easy in the conservation world to win.
Yeah. Julian, you're a conservationist. Can you describe how your career developed, please?
Yeah, okay. So I'm actually very lucky because my path seemed fairly clear from a very early age. I was born in Cardiff, and then my folks moved up to North Wales and bought a house on top of a mountain, a small mountain in North Wales, an old farmhouse, which they then renovated. But the guy they bought it off was collecting moths for Rothampstead Insect Survey at the time, and he had a permanent moth trap in the garden, which he didn't take away with him, so he left it there. And I turned it on, and at the age of 7, I started collecting moths with this moth trap that was left in the garden. And then the moths led on to butterflies, and then the butterflies, you know, and then the books, various books for presents, for Christmas presents came and stuff like that. And there was one book. So I started studying moths and butterflies of Britain and got very interested in those. There was light trapping and some excellent books by Richard South, and then there was one by Robert Gooden called Butterflies that my mum bought me for Christmas once. And in that book, there is a watercolor painting of a young man walking through a rainforest glade, catching butterflies, with the butterflies all dancing around him and everything else, with the sunlight crisscrossing in shafts of sunlight, and you look down this gallery of rainforest. It's a watercolor painting. But that sort of almost seeing that image sort of at a very young age said, oh, I want to go and do that. And that's what I did. But I mean, I think it shows that, but that started that whole experience, and collecting moths on the light trap and everything just basically started a interest and fascination and passion for natural history. That started in Britain, and then at the age of 18, I went to Africa for the first time. And yeah, well, Africa was you know, such a different experience to Wales, although there are similarities. but it just opened the door of even more fascination and even more incredible sights of magic and beauty in the natural world, which is Africa. And then because I'm from the mountains in Wales, I gravitated towards the mountains in Africa, and then the rainforests, obviously, because I feel something about forest. It's quite special. Natural forest, there's something very special about natural forest. It's very ancient and still, and you know, quite special habitat, I find. Anyway, so yeah, and then I started working in mountains and forests in Africa, and essentially that was, I don't know, 30 odd years ago, and I haven't really stopped since. And every time I go back to a forest, every time I go into a rainforest or a wet forest in Africa, I'm always, it never gets boring. It's always new. It's always exciting. And you always see new stuff. And every time it's a new experience, which is part of the magic of working in those environments, I think.
Julian, what skills and personal qualities do you need to do what you do?
Well, I never really thought I was academically, that I think I'm fairly average when it comes to academia. I don't think I'm massively academic.
I bet you did,
So,
but carry on.
but well, I did get a distinction in the masters. But anyway, whatever. But
You did.
otherwise, I think I'm fairly average. But I think really the qualities and the skills come down to having a genuine passion and a genuine interest, and just following your heart and following what you want to do and following what you're interested in. And I think it's really it don't expect things to happen quickly. Things take time. It's a slow process of little by little you get more experience, little by little you get better at what you do. Little by little, people notice and realize what you're doing. Little by little, the doors start to open to other opportunities and things come along. But it's not necessarily financially rewarding. I mean, I don't think I earned any real money much before the age of 35, if that, but it's rewarding in other ways. And if you're a committed conservationist and you love the natural world, then well, I mean, you get to see, the most amazing sights of natural beauty and magic that I would say most of the world doesn't get to see. So, I mean, you are blessed in that sense that you can work in environments where you see the magic of nature and the beauty of nature, and then that sort of reinforces the desire to protect and conserve it all as well, and that gives you that commitment to dedicate your life to do it. And it's not a bad thing to dedicate your life to do. I mean, you want the world to be around for a bit longer. You want plants and animals to be around for much longer, and you want them to exist in a natural way, in a state that they were evolved to be. And so, trying to protect and hang on to, these remaining areas of natural wilderness and natural beauty and high biodiversity, I think is very important. And it's very important for many reasons on many different levels. I mean, you can look at this in many different ways. I mean, you can look at it aesthetically. It's good. It's good to just see and it, just to feel that you're connected to nature and nature's connected to you, and it's a beautiful thing. And see the magic and the beauty and stuff like that. It's needed obviously for the plants and the animals, because without that they would die or they would go extinct if we don't try and address some of the more destructive elements of humankind, which is essentially destroying these natural areas of wilderness and beauty. And then even you could look at it in other things. I mean, it's good for humankind to have them there because the let's say the forests would clean the atmosphere that we breathe, and stuff like that. Without those forests, then that atmosphere, which is the global atmosphere, and it travels through the trade winds all around the earth, we all breathe it. And so, the forests in the Congo or the forests in the Amazon are actually creating the clean air that we're breathing here in Wales, as well as the forests in Wales, of course. But so it's all. I think the most important thing to realize about nature is everything is connected. Um, Everything is connected. And so the mistake that humankind make in this day and age is to feel that we're detached and we're separate and we are different and we're not in the same package as the rest of nature and the plants and the animals and everything else, when actually we are. And what was interesting when COVID hit, something I was working in Ethiopia at the time, and I think it was early 2019, and 1 month had gone by and everybody was panicking about COVID. After 2 months, the whole of Europe had shut down, all the airports were closed, and we had to get the last flight back to the UK from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And essentially, the whole world had shut down within 2 months. And that just shows you how quickly everything can crumble and how quickly everything can change. I mean, and this was at a global scale, and Europe was essentially closed. You couldn't fly into Europe. All the airports had closed after 2 months. So that just shows you how fragile actually we are and how dependent actually we are on the rest of the natural world. And we mess with that at our peril, and we destroy that at our loss. you know. So, I mean, being a conservationist is probably one of the most important things you can probably do with your life at this, I think, in this day and age.
What questions, Julian, regarding African rainforest conservation would you like to see addressed in the next 30 years?
What's missing is a recognition of its importance. The big rainforests are across Central and West Africa. And that's your Congolese rainforest belt. It's your upper Guinean Congolese rainforest belt. And these are massive areas of forest. I mean, you're talking hundreds of millions of hectares of forest. If you come to East Africa, then it's a rarer habitat, and Southern Africa, it's a rarer habitat. So the rainforests that I'm dealing with are essentially montane rainforests. These are small for a number of reasons. One is because they are the leftovers of a larger rainforest belt that stretched across the whole of Africa to the coast. And then post-glacial, or no, actually before that, obviously, in the Miocene, 15 million years ago, then that rainforest belt started to break up. And these montane forests are pockets of left or isolated forest that is left over from this once continuous belt. And essentially they are small and isolated because the climate has changed in a way that lower down the wet forest doesn't exist and you now have woodland. So these pockets of montane forest are small by nature anyway because they are the last remnants of a once larger forest belt, which has naturally decreased and declined. And then on top of that, so it's a rare habitat, it's an isolated habitat, it's a small habitat type in southern Africa. And then on top of that, the local people are chopping it down essentially. It's mainly down, the threats are mainly down to shifting agriculture rather than commercial logging. And the shifting agriculture is because, you know, the soil underneath these patches of montane forest is very rich. And so it's very good for growing crops. And so essentially, they take a hectare at a time or something and take the forest down and grow their crops for 3 or 4 or 5 years and get good results. So, and you can't blame them for that. I mean, these people have got to eat. That's not necessarily you can't. If you want to change that, then you have to give them a sustainable alternative whereby they have an income or they have a replacement for the food or the crops which they're growing, or even fertilizers or conservation agriculture or something like that. That means they can get the same yield without having to cut down the forest. And that's a whole investment program that's required to help save these forests. But I mean, coming back to the question is, what would I like to see is I'd like to see the African governments value these forests significantly so that they can be formally protected and that the local communities can be given alternatives, which means they don't have to cut down the forest. So we recognize the value of these forests, and African governments are starting to recognize the value of these forests. I mean, I was working on a project in Tanzania called Valuing the Ark, and that was Ecosystem Service Evaluation Project. And the Ark refers to the Eastern Arc Mountains that go down the east side of Tanzania from the north to the south, all the way down. And ecosystem services are essentially any benefit of nature, any value of nature that benefits humankind. And that can be anything from biodiversity to carbon to water to nature-based tourism to non-timber forest products and stuff like that. So so water is obviously a very strong one. So from some of these mountain blocks in the Eastern Arc Mountains, you get major rivers that then flow out, that originate in these forests, in these mountains, and then flow out, for example, to the capital city of Dar es Salaam, or maybe some other regional cities like Mbeya or Iringa. And water is important, and African governments and stuff understand water, or understand the value of water. And so one way of trying to protect these places is rather than saying here's all these plants and animals that are found nowhere else in the world, and everybody says, well, that's very nice, but say, well, actually here are the mountains and the forests that actually create the water, that the source of the water of the major rivers that feeds your capital city. And so if you actually cut down those forests, then you're going to affect the water supply into your capital city. And now that's an economic statement, but it's also a conservation statement. So I mean, there's many ways. So that's an example of how how conservation can work in different ways to for the same result. I mean, one of the ways is you must protect these places because you've got 5 birds that are only found nowhere else in the world, and 10 bats and 3 chameleons or something like that. Or you could say, well, this forest is essentially a sponge that absorbs all the water in the dry season and slowly lets it out absorbs it in the wet season and slowly lets it out in the dry season, and that water then flows down to your capital city. And so if you actually cut down this forest, then although you might have water flowing in the wet season because it's raining, in the dry season there's no stored water because the forest is gone, and so the rivers run dry. And that sort of approach can also work very nicely. If you use both of them, they can be quite a strong case. So the value of these forests is important, recognizing the value of these forests in terms of its biodiversity and also in terms of its ecosystem service and its watershed. I think getting people to realize those two things will help save them.
Julian, where do our knowledge gaps lie regarding these forests?
I think that depends where you go. Some forests have been surveyed very well. Some are yet to be surveyed. So, I mean, we're coming to the end of 20 years' work at Mabu Forest now in Mozambique, and we've had about 15 scientific expeditions. And we're coming to the stage now where we're not really finding, every time we've been finding new stuff, new species, all the rest of it. Now we're getting to a stage where we've sort of found it all now. So there's a whole bunch of groups that we haven't looked at, for example, things like spiders and stuff like that, and velvet worms. So I think from now on, if we go back, we need to look at more obscure groups or less commonly studied groups, and then we'll find plenty of new stuff again. Without a doubt, there'll be plenty of new stuff. But in the more common groups now, we're coming to a stage where we're not turning up anything new, which means we've surveyed it well enough. We've done the survey of that. But then other places need full-on surveys and plenty of work. There's a site I'm working at in Ethiopia at the moment, Godafeda honey forest, and that's 5 times bigger than the forest in Mozambique. And the forest in Mozambique is the largest rainforest in southern Africa, so this is 5 times bigger than that.
Wow.
And that's in northeast Africa, and it's quite bizarre because you think Ethiopia, you think sort of dry and deserty or whatever, but it's not. In the southwest of Ethiopia, it's all mountains and hills and forest, and this forest is on the border of South Sudan. And it's probably the wettest forest I've ever been to. It's on a 2,000-meter plateau, and it's primary Afro-montane rainforest. And it's massive, and it's in excellent condition. And this is a site that we don't know much about, that we need to start. And I've done 2 expeditions there, but that's only scratching the surface. So we need to go back and carry on surveying that. And then there's other places like in South Sudan on the DRC border. There's lots of mountains around there. I mean, basically, these are areas that have not received much biological survey, maybe nothing at all, and often they're like that because of the instability in the country that they're in. So fighting and war and everything else, it makes it, in other words, it's dangerous to go there. But yeah, so the knowledge gaps depend on the site really, yeah, it depends where you go.
Julian, can you suggest a research project for an undergraduate student?
I think, well, a research project for an undergraduate student, I think, should probably focus on something that they're interested in. So, what are you interested in? I mean, are you interested in birds, reptiles, amphibians, butterflies, ants? So I think one of my first proper research projects was on a species of ant. And I was on an expedition. It was in between my 2nd and 3rd year of my first degree expedition in Tanzania. And as a volunteer. And then I saw this species of ant, which was Megaponera fetans, the Matabele ant, renamed Pachycondyla annulis. And it sends out these foraging columns of maybe 1,000. No, the colony itself is only maybe 1,000 ants, and they're quite big, about an inch long. And it sends out a scout, and it finds termites. It only eats termites, and then the scout comes back and it lays a scent trail, and it picks up 200 ants from the nest, and they all go out, and then they attack the termites, and they forage, and it's all done through pheromonal trails and stuff. So I basically sat outside this nest. I got one immigrating, and I sat outside this nest for 6 weeks from dawn till dusk every day. And I counted every ant that came in and out. I noted the times, and then I measured the distance and the angles and everything else. And I just had created this amazing record of foraging behavior for this species of ant. And then I just drew up all of the foraging maps, because I had the distances and the directions with the compass, and the times in, the times out, and then I counted how many termites they killed and everything else. And you could just extrapolate this all up. It was in a dry forest in Tanzania, and they were eating the termites that go up the sides of trees. And so I calculated the nest density of this ant in the forest, the size of the forest, so you could work out how many nests there were. On average, how many ants were in the nest, so you could work out how many ants were in the forest of this species. And then the termites that were being taken per day or over that time, I then extrapolated that out and could calculate the amount of termites that this thing was eating every day. And then some of the trees in the forest have some termite defensive measures. So the termites go up the sides of the trees in these tunnels made of mud. They make these mud tunnels, which they go up and down. And some trees have flaky bark, so the thing keeps on flaking off, so they have to remake them and have to remake them. So I concluded that, without the predation pressure of this ant on the species of termite, then that would actually affect the tree composition of the forest, because the trees wouldn't be able to hold back the termite predation of the trees, and so that would actually affect the tree composition of the forest. And so that's an example of how everything in nature is sort of connected and stuff like that, which is nice. And that was like one of the first things I ever did. So, but I did it because I was interested. So I mean, if see something that you're interested in, everybody is interested in something. So if you're into ecology, if you're into conservation, somewhere in there is a spark of interest that brought you in the first place. And so stick with that, go with that, whatever that spark of interest, or it could be several sparks of interest. It could be many things that you're interested in. You might have been, watching Attenborough or something like that, and but whatever interests you, go for that and find that, and then start studying that.
That's an undergraduate project. What advice can you offer, Julian, for somebody wanting to be a conservation biologist?
Well, pretty much the same thing, really. I mean, I think what I've done is it's been a slow, steady by steady procedure of one experience after another to sort of get to where I've got to so far. But I mean, I think what I've always done is try to. I mean, if you're into conservation, then you're trying to make a difference, basically. So. And you want to win. You want some conservation success. You want all of your time and the effort to add up to making a difference and saving something. So what I've done is I've tried to concentrate on sites, like Mabu Forest, or like this new site in Ethiopia, which I'm now starting to focus on, and stuff like that, and Mulanje in Malawi and stuff like that. Find a site and concentrate on it, and then commit to it for a number of years until you feel that you've made a difference, or try and leave a site improved in some capacity in terms of conservation than when you arrived. Or if it's actually being destroyed, then try and highlight that to the wider international community and try and get other people interested and involved to try and stop that or address that, really. But I think from my side is find a site and concentrate on that site and try and leave it in a better condition, try and help save it, try and help protect it, and try and help conserve it, because that's what we're doing. Conservation is all about conserving. So yeah, I would say do that, and then try and become an expert in something as well. So find a niche. If you become an expert, you have a niche, and if you get that niche, then people will come and find you, and that also helps with work. If you can have people contacting you about possible work opportunities, then that's much easier than you going to have to find them yourself. So if you can develop a niche for yourself, then that also helps. So I guess what's my niche? I mean, I'm now an African ecologist because I've been working in Africa over 30 years. I focus on mountains and forests. I do protected area management, and butterflies and a whole suite of other things really.
Julian, you are a forest ecologist and conservation biologist. Thank you very much for being on the Practical Animal Channel, Professor Julian Bayliss.
Thank you very much, John. It's great to see you again.
You
Much
too,
appreciated. Take care.